Welcome your host, Caddy Frank, as she leads discussions about substance use disorder and the journey to recovery. You're listening to Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution.
Gotta let that tunage just kind of tap in there and kind of set the mood for the day. Well, hello, everybody. We are here at Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution at AM 950. Excited to be here. I want to do some special thanks to some folks, our generous funders and donors, including the Patrick and Amy Butler Family Foundation, the Otto Bremer Trust, sorry about that, the Sauer Family Foundation, and the Hardenborough Foundation, alongside maybe some private donors, some donations, some anybody who's been volunteering for Minnesota Recovery Connection, giving us their time. And we always will take contributions because this is a magical show that we have here. And what it does is it's taught me that people are listening and it's exciting and they're getting kind of understood and versed on recovery. So if you have a spare shekel in your pocket, if anybody has any idea what I just said, and you got any extra money, honey, please feel free to donate to Minnesota Recovery Connection because we can always use that support. And across the table from me, who do I have over there? You.
Yes, Julian.
Julian! Hi, dear. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me today.
Yes, Julian's a little anxious because he's never been on the radio before, as far as I know. Have you?
No, I haven't.
Oh, first time. Yay! I love to see the fear and also the anxiety begin to drift away as we go on. So we generally open up the show with asking what's right with you. So I'm going to ask you, Julian, what's right with you today?
Well, I am alive and I am also not incarcerated. When I was 18 years old, I was told that I could spend the next 20 years of my life incarcerated in federal prison. And by grace, that didn't happen. And I am here today. And if it wasn't for that, I would be still serving about another 10 years in federal prison.
Well, I would say that is absolutely something to say that is right with you today.
Absolutely.
Now, you ask me the same question.
What is right with you today, Caddy?
Just always got to give you a little hint on that one. You're not the first person. Let's see. What's right with me today? It is a day that there is, in theory, love in the air when we're actually recording this. So I'll let everybody know it's Valentine's Day, Friday before the show actually airs. And I want to just say I appreciate all the people who listen to this show near and far. And I'm very grateful to have good people in my life. I sat in my chair this morning sending off little Valentines to the people that maybe don't have what they consider a partner in life, but are good friends and people that deserve just as much love. So I send that off to you, Julian, as well.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. So that's what's right with me. So Julian is here because he is someone who is involved at Minnesota Recovery Connection. Why don't you give us a little snapshot of what brought you to Minnesota Recovery Connection and what you do for our incredible organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started as a volunteer in the summer of 2022, I want to say.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And I started at Minnesota Recovery Connection because at the time I was in treatment and I wanted a way to give back.
A common theme.
Yeah, it was something I wanted to do. It was also something that was a requirement of me for my treatment program.
Okay.
And based on my justice impacted background, I couldn't find an organization that was willing to let me volunteer with them. They basically said, thanks, but no thanks.
That happens sometimes.
We don't want you.
Okay.
And so after trying about over a dozen places and getting that same answer, I stumbled upon Minnesota Recovery Connection, and they said, we don't care what you've done. We have an open door policy, and we want you to come and be a part of the family here.
Nice.
So For about the first 6 months or so, I worked the front desk, answering phone calls, just helping out with various office tasks, preparing manuals for the recovery coach.
Oh, yes, that is like the key component to that
Yeah.
front desk duty.
And then I was asked to step into the role of doing telephone recovery support.
What's that?
So basically checking in with people that have signed up for that service on a weekly basis just to see how they're doing in their recovery and what, if any, resources they may need. So like
Yeah.
housing, food, clothing, job, or even if they're just looking for someone to have a conversation with and
Yeah.
to connect with.
Yeah, it's such an incredible service. We actually did a training last night together.
Yes, we
Well,
did.
sort of handoff training.
Yes.
And what's really cool about that at Minnesota Recovery Connection is that you can just head to our website and let's say you need somebody to talk to, and we are not trying to fix you. We're not trying to tell you what to do. We're just there as a kind human on the other end of the line who's volunteering at our organization. And you go and you sign up and you say, hey, Wednesdays somewhere between like 2 and 5, I'll probably be available. And if you were to call, that would be super fantastic. And what have some of those conversations looked like when you've had a phone call?
It just depends on the person. That's oftentimes you get people and they're in the middle of doing something.
Right.
And so they don't have a lot of time to talk. But they're like, thanks for the call. I just needed that reminder that someone was there and somebody cared. Other times you get someone and they're in a really good place.
Yeah.
And they just want someone to listen and help celebrate that
Nice.
with them. Other times you get someone that's really struggling, that has a lot on their plate. And again, they just want not only someone to listen to what they're going through, but potentially to point them in the direction of a handful of resources.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, when we think about the recovery community from any vantage point, sometimes we just don't know what we don't know, right? And the idea is that if a nice phone call comes in and it's a day when you're like scratching the side of your head and you're like, I'm not quite sure what to do about low on the funds. It's towards the end of the month. Where's there a food shelf? And Julian happens to call and he can look at the resources on our website page and say, hey, here's a few places in Minneapolis or St. Paul or Coon Rapids or Edina or Rosemount, where people can get food or whatever the service that maybe somebody even needs to go to treatment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't necessarily have Julian on that as a volunteer do that, but he would say, hey, sounds like you really are in need of something. I'm going to get you over to one of our either peer recovery specialists or certified peer recovery specialists, and they'll walk along on that journey with you. Have you ever done that with someone?
Yeah, I have. And about a year and a half ago, I was asked to come on as an intern with Minnesota Recovery Connection as one of the community engagements interns. So to be able to help that process of people walking along that journey, and to be able to specifically help facilitate those telephone recovery support trainings and to work more closely with the justice impacted population.
Yeah. So Julian's been on sort of a trajectory at Minnesota Recovery Connection as a volunteer and then an intern. And then what else do you do for Minnesota Recovery Connection?
I am also part of the Peer Advisory Council, which is a group of individuals who are either in recovery themselves or are a person who is supportive of those who are in recovery. And we meet once a month to talk about different recovery related issues and try to plan different fun recovery events and to put on different things for the recovery community and to find out what the community actually needs from MRC.
Yeah. So one of the requirements that we have as a nonprofit recovery community organization is we need to have this group of individuals pulled together, band together, and just bring Minnesota Recovery Connection, just like, hey, this is what we're hearing in the community. They have an event and they hear things that are going on. So Julian has just been an integral part of what we do. So we're going to take our first break. And when we come back, we're going to hear a bit more about Julian and kind of where he has been, where he's going, what he's doing. And so we will look forward to hearing you and not hearing you. You're hearing us, and we're talking to you. That's what we're doing here at this radio station. Sometimes I get confused. See you back here in a few minutes, a few seconds.
Through this year of being alone.
Here we are, back at it again, having a conversation. Welcome back. We are sitting here at this table. I'm looking at who? Julian, and you are a volunteer as well as a PAC member. We call it PAC, so the Peer Advisory Council. You are a former intern. You've done a lot of things with Minnesota Recovery Connection. But one of the conversations that you were very interested in having is talking about recovery from the perspective of we always have our brain wrapped around abuse of substances. It's always about the abuse of substances. But you have your own lived experience around recovery. And then there's so many other things that we recover from. So give us a little snapshot of kind of your lens on what the recovery world and all those things are.
Yeah, so I like to say I'm a man in long-term recovery from a non-substance use disorder or addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason I like to say that is because I think oftentimes, as you mentioned, we have this lens of addiction, and thus recovery is only related to substances.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's true. I think there's so much more than just alcohol and or drugs that someone can be addicted to, whether that's shopping, whether that's sex, whether that's gambling, games, pornography, whatever. I think that recovery shouldn't be limited because addiction certainly is not.
Yeah, and when you talk about that, I think, food particularly, a lot of people, they might transfer from one addiction or one bad habit that can really take over their lives. And you have helped me sort of see the recovery community from a wider lens, that when people are impacted by these activities that consume their lives. And that's really what it is. I mean, an addiction to me is you are consumed by something. So you can be consumed by alcohol or a drug, whatever that substance might be. But then it also can be, as you said, gambling. It can be sex. It can be pornography. It can be food. It can be shopping. It can be gaming in the traditional sense. It can be online gambling. It can be racetrack gambling. It can be you're obsessed with other humans.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things. So as in your experience, how have you sort of seen recovery sort of expand in terms of how your recovery journey has worked?
Say more about
You've
that.
been in treatment. So you've been in treatment to help yourself with this. And so in the individuals that you've been part of outside of the substance world, you've seen people, recover. What does that look like to them?
So one of the biggest things that was true for me, and I've seen be true for so many other people that struggle, is that their lives are ruled by fear, whether that's fear of getting caught, fear of being found out, fear of being inadequate. And so one of the things I'd like to say that recovery gave me is the ability to not have fear dictate my every move.
Wow, that's intense. Yeah. And then if I roll it back to myself, fear of just what the consequences are of somebody finding out about that. One of the things you mentioned is that you have a justice impacted background. And I want you to kind of, talk about that in that justice involved, lens that some people might not understand.
Yeah. So I think we have a system in the United States that is very punitive and is one that is focused very much on shame and stigma. One of the things that I've learned through my own experience and also through some of the research that I've done through being in college is that one of the greatest predictors of whether someone is able to abstain from their criminal behavior long term is how they're seen by society. It's not necessarily something they have control over, but it's how society views them. And if society views them as being defined by their worst mistakes, then they are much more likely to continue engaging in those harmful choices. And I think the way that we're set up in this country, that unfortunately the crimes that have some of the most drastic effects on a whole host of people are the ones where there's the most stigma. So crimes that are like a predatory or a violent nature are the ones that have the most stigma. And those are the ones that oftentimes people are told you can't change. Like, the recovery isn't for you. It's
Right.
not physically possible for you to get better.
Yeah. And I think when we were talking about this prior to the show, I think I've mentioned on many occasions that we have a grant through the Department of Corrections. And the thing about it is that I have been inside prisons. I was just in one this week at the Lino Lakes, talking to, I think there were 7 gentlemen that we trained to be peer recovery specialists within the Department of Corrections. And I've been to Stillwater, I've been to St. Cloud, I've been to Faribault, I've been to, where else have I been? I worked with gentlemen in the Moose Lake Correctional Facility. And I can honestly say I've been in rooms with people who have, like you said, have had very violent crimes against other individuals. And I'm telling you here, first and foremost, regardless of what they were labeled based on one time in one place in their life, I've met some of the most honorable men and women, Shakopee as well. Thank you, Shakopee. I just remembered, and women in the community. And it's like recovery and reform can happen, but it does have to kind of come from within or bring in resources to help people, right?
Absolutely. And I think so a wise person once told me is that he had never met a person that had committed a crime that didn't make sense to him once they considered like all the circumstances the person was going through. Yes, there was a whole bunch of harm caused, but when you looked at it through the lens of the person who had committed an offense, you could honestly say, I understand why you made the choices you did.
Or
So
understand better. Maybe
right,
understand better. Yeah.
It doesn't excuse what you did. That doesn't take away the harm that you caused, but I can at least understand why you made those choices.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's going to be a class that we're going to be having for, it's a closed group, but hopefully it will be an open group. And we were talking about trauma-informed care. And we were talking about the traumatic experiences that happen to people, particularly people who are young, and how they will go forward if they've been in a traumatic environment or a harmful environment or have had traumatic events around them or have witnessed it, that can lead people on a path that they will sort of be in that mode and only know how to react traumatically versus with logic or with having other abilities to decipher the situation. So if somebody yells at you for your entire childhood and that's the only thing you know, then you might grow up and yell at everybody around you because you haven't had other influences in that. And that can happen in many different ways. It can be physical harm, mental harm, emotional harm, verbal harm, whatever the case is. And I know that logically, but when I saw it pointed out in this class that I'm going to be supporting, I was like, darn tootin'. It's absolutely right. You know, I came from some neglect in the background of my life. And what happened is that I sort of overcompensate in many different ways. I'm very maybe too caring and care for people and want to fix the bejesus out of people. Because if you didn't get it, you want to give it, right?
And going back to our one of our previous points about it, bringing it back to addiction and like from a justice impacted standpoint.
Yeah.
Imagine someone knows that they're struggling with something and they know that it's illegal and that they shouldn't be doing this. But because of that stigma, especially if it's outside of substances, if you think about the way that those types of crimes are portrayed in the media, it's never ever someone has graduated from treatment or they're doing well in the community. It's always the person that has gotten out, reoffended, and hurt another person.
Right.
So that message then gets passed on of, I can't ask for like there's no place for me to go to ask for help, and the only way I can potentially get that help is after I've offended and hurt someone and been caught.
Yeah. So they're kind of trapped, the individual is trapped. And I think about it from the standpoint, I was like, thinking of an example as you were talking. It's like somebody has a gambling addiction. And if you've got a gambling addiction and you're running out of money, I was actually watching something on Netflix, not an advertisement for Netflix, but I was watching a show on gambling, and a mature woman who was just absolutely deep in the throes of her gambling addiction. She ran out of money and every resource. She had sold everything she owned. She had begun to lean on families and relatives. And one day she just thought it was a decent idea to go rob a convenience store, because the consumption of that need, that addiction to gamble, was greater than any logic that could ever possibly be there. And so it took that level of then getting caught to have somebody say, hey, what's going on here? But until that point, she was trapped. She was trapped in this place where if she admitted to her family, even though her family knew, but the family wouldn't say anything. So it's this secrecy that comes around when somebody has an addiction or has a problem, that you're right. The stigma of some sort of addiction, regardless of what it is, can sometimes just keep somebody just locked in their own universe, and then there is a ripple effect that happens to other people, but then they don't want to talk about it because they feel the shame and they feel the stigma around it. So what do? You maybe go to the next level, like you were saying, and you perpetrate a crime on an individual or a community, and then only when you're busted do you get help, potentially. Hopefully, if possible. I mean, and that's what we're trying to do with our current grant with the Department of Corrections, is that impact people who are incarcerated to help people who are incarcerated. And then when they get out, the people who have been incarcerated and let back into the community, having to do, like you said, all of the right things in terms of the justice system, but can they impact the community positively? We have to think about all these different things, but we have to then give somebody some hope when they get out. It's like, you're not that bad person. You're trying really hard.
Yeah, and that's one of the other things that I've seen firsthand, is that the importance of hope.
Mm-hmm.
So, I have a number of friends that I'm very close to that are on lifetime supervised release. So that means basically they have someone telling them what they can and can't do every day for the rest of their lives.
Oy.
And even though their offense occurred over 10 years ago and they've been living offense-free since then, they're basically told, this is how you have to live for the rest of your life. And there's no hope of ever getting off that. And just think about what message does that send to the person of basically, I'm defined by the worst choices that I've ever made. And no matter what I do to better myself, that's all I'm seen as.
Right. And then every day that individual walks down the road, they have to sort of be looking over their shoulder, left and right. Am I doing the right thing? And I think your point is so incredible. And that is, after 10, 12, whatever years, if somebody's on this lifetime thing, we understand. And please do not think that we are saying that people should not have some sort of oversight, because they're generally victims within this offense that took
Absolutely.
place. So we are not excusing behavior, but we want to give hope to individuals so that they don't feel trapped again and maybe do the same thing that was hurting another person or a community or a family member, whatever that looks like. Because if you're held captive, and I've actually met men who have been captive in jail for 20 and 30 years, sometimes I think 35 years, there's a mentality. And even if you put somebody out on the street and still have them in that mindset, it messes with your head.
Well, yes, and I'm thinking of one of my close friends right now that's on lifetime supervision, and him and I have had a conversation multiple times where he said, I had more freedom in prison than I do now that I am out on the street and I've been offense-free for 10 years.
Yeah.
That's something that I think needs to change.
Yeah. No, and I know that there are great people that are sort of advocating for understanding when an individual and this goes for people who struggle with substance use as well as all these other addictions. When you have felt either trapped as a child or a young person, or you have had a situation where you haven't been able to express what the problem is, there again, that trappedness will keep you stuck in that behavior, whatever it is, because your fear of outing yourself is more traumatizing than the events that might be hurting yourself or other people, or potentially hurting yourself or other people.
Yeah, and one of the most common restrictions for those that are on the lifetime supervised release is that they can't have contact with other justice impacted individuals.
Crazy
So,
town.
so if you think about that, that means they can't attend 12-step meetings if they so want to. They can't have contact with graduates from their treatment program if they have graduated from treatment. So where are they supposed to turn when they're struggling with someone or with something, and they want help? That they're not going to turn to their probation officer.
Not necessarily, no.
They're not necessarily. If it's 2:00 in the morning, they're not going to have access to a therapist. So where do they turn in those moments where they're struggling and want help?
Well, and I think that's where, it kind of dials us back right to why Minnesota Recovery Connection is in existence. And that is, we can, in the substance use disorder world, with our lived experience, talk to other people. And now there are people that are struggling with all kinds of different addictions that are either justice involved or financially involved or substance involved or other human involved. And if a person who has the same lived experience can talk to that other person, like if I, as a person who used alcohol as my substance back in the day, I can talk to somebody who struggled with alcohol, and I can understand them a whole lot better than somebody who's a therapist, if they've never used alcohol in an inappropriate way. That peer-to-peer relationship is just the whole idea. And so here you're talking about those who might have justice impacted lives. Who better to talk to who are in recovery from whatever the heck they might have done, or, don't want to do again, but to talk to somebody who gets them.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the magic is. And this is where, when I work with the men and the women who have been impacted in the justice system, they find so much relief talking to one another. They're also in a controlled environment where talking to one another would not be said not to do. It's actually encouraged because it's controlled. So, let's kind of look at the situation. But we know that talking to somebody about what's going on in your head or in your heart or in your emotions heals. It's talking. It's like getting it out of that. I call it, the hamster wheel in our head.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for anybody who's got a family member, a friend, a neighbor who's been impacted by whatever the addiction is, give them a chance to say, yeah, I might have screwed up at one point, but don't, like you said, Julian, don't judge me by what I did. Look at who I am today and what I've done to repair whatever that is.
And also for that family member, have some hope. Things may not look good right now.
Mm-hmm.
Your family member still may be struggling.
Yeah.
Have some hope. It took me multiple years before I got my act straightened out, and before I became the person that I am today. But just because that process takes a long time doesn't necessarily mean that it won't happen.
Yeah. And I mean, I think about it. I drank, probably a good 19, 29, 39, good 20 years. And it took me a good getting into that 7-8 year mark to, first of all, forgive myself for my behavior. And then it took some time for family and friends to begin to, I didn't really lose trust, but what I lost from people was I lost their ability to see me as I can get better and I won't go back to those behaviors, because I was a little manipulative. I blacked out all the time, so I didn't remember anything. And so people were like, yeah, this is what you did or what you didn't do, or we had no idea you were all that kind of drunk, Caddy. And so we have to remember that if you had 20 years of doing a behavior, it's not going to be cleaned up in 30 days of treatment. It's going to take maybe a couple, 2, 3 years for you to just process along. And that's why I talk about, as a person who struggled with alcohol overuse, is that I was sober and then I was really sober. And then I found recovery, because recovery is the journey of understanding that it is a lifelong journey.
Yes. And I think with that, there's also a piece of willingness.
Yeah.
So I know for myself that when I was in my active addiction, I believe that's what defined me as a human being. So when I was told, hey, you can't do this anymore, I'm like, why? Like, I understand that it's harmful. I understand my actions are hurting another person, but you're not giving me an alternative here.
Right.
You're not saying that it's possible for me to become a better human being and showing me what that looks like and how to achieve that. And it took a period of time for me to get on board with that message and to believe that there was hope for me.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, that people are dealing with people that struggle with any kind of addiction. Have hope, have faith that as long as you support them, or they have a supportive environment, whatever that might look like, it can be achieved. But to your point, Julian, we have to give people hope, and we have to just care enough. We don't have to forgive right away, and we certainly are not going to forget. But it can become further in the past because we have to look forward. Recovery is about looking forward. I say to my class every day that I've got, 24 years in recovery, but every day I look at it, and every day it's my number one priority. I don't maybe have it on the top of my brain every day, but if I ever get frustrated or I get pissed off or something, I'm like, okay, just stay chill, Caddy, because you don't want to go to the alternative, because going to a bar and not going to solve nothing, because you're going to be a hot mess in a hot minute for sure. But my recovery has to be my number one priority. And I've said that that's even over my partner. That was even over my little grandma. My little grandma was my most important thing in the whole wide world. And anybody who knows me out there knows that she was my rock. But she couldn't be the first person on the list. I had to be. And that's hard for some people to understand.
Yeah. The thing that comes to my mind when I hear you say that is, when I was in treatment, we had this we called each other brothers, because that's the type of relationship that we wanted to cultivate with each other.
Brotherhood.
Right.
Yeah.
And we said that we were each other's, we cared about each other's lives more than our feelings. So what that meant is that we were able to give each other the hard feedback, sometimes the things that we knew the person didn't want to hear, but also they needed to hear, because that's how much we cared about the person.
Right.
And we were willing to sacrifice that relationship, even because we knew that sometimes that meant they would be able to make a change that was necessary.
Right, to kind of overcome it. It's one of the foundational pieces of the work that we do with peer recovery services, is sometimes you have to be honest and direct with someone. It doesn't mean you do it without compassion, but sometimes you have to tell somebody the truth.
Right.
That action was bad. That action was inappropriate. That action was, going out and reusing your chemical was really a bad idea, but tell me why you did it. Tell me why you had the thought, or tell me why you are challenged right now. But sometimes we have to remember that we can be honest and direct, and we can challenge somebody, but we have to remember that we have to give them hope and give encouragement kind of right behind that. It's like, I need to tell you that this action is poor. This is not something that I want for you, but tell me why you did it, but I'm still going to have faith in you that you can overcome it. That's a message that's really critical for anybody who struggles with any kind of addiction, is that I still have hope for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm looking at Julian's eyes, and he's just like starry-eyed. He's like, wow, we're in this recovery jam right now, Caddy. It's really, really cool. So when we come back from break in a little bit, I want to sort of kind of come to where you are working now, because you're really doing some really great work with the community that is justice impact. And this is what what we can do for communities that have a justice involved background. It's like there are places where people employ them and say, we're going to support you, not regardless, but what you did in the past is not who you are. Here you are today. And we want to give you that opportunity to move forward, because if we can move forward in life, just like in recovery from whatever it is, we got a chance. I mean, it's an amazing thing. So thank you for listening to Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution. Julian and I will be back in a flash. So thank you, AM 950 as well.
And this house needs love in it.
Love that music. Love that music. Here we are back at Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution. I love saying that. I just feel so powerful. Isn't it great?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was listening to one of my local radio stations the other day, and a woman said, who works on the radio, she said, you just got to put out there when you're happy and when things are going and what your dreams are. And I think that's a little bit about what we're doing here, Julian, is that we all can recover. We all need support, and we all need people to believe in us, even if we are not so quite sure all the time. But if we have people that believe in us, it is a way that we can say, if you can believe in me, maybe I can believe in myself.
Absolutely.
And that's sometimes some of the hardest like barriers, bumps, room closing in on us. And where Julian works is a place where that is what they do for folks. So you work for Repower. I would love you to tell them about kind of your trajectory that you had there. You went there, and then now you're all fancified over there. So tell people what recovery. Will you tell them? I'm gonna Google it up. Repowered.
Yes. So Repowered is a work readiness program for people that have some sort of barrier to employment, whether that be a medical barrier, whether that be a justice impacted background, or anything else. If you have some sort of barrier to employment.
And let me ask a question there. So somebody who has tried to get a job and they sort of just continually don't get the job, this is an opportunity. They come to Repower and they say, this has been my problem. Can you help me, type of thing?
Yeah.
There we go.
There's not necessarily a promise that Repowered will be the place for that individual, but at least can be a conversation, and they can help look for someplace else as well.
Nice.
So I started there in 2021, and when I got brought into the program, I had never worked a full-time job in my entire life.
Wow.
Because I had been arrested at 18 years old, and I had been dealing with the consequences of those decisions for the rest of my adult life up until that point. And so they brought me in and said, we understand that you have some significant barriers here, but we want to give you a job. We want to give you work experience, and we want to give you an opportunity to grow here. So
Nice.
It's not the most glamorous work at times, but it is an electronics recycling plant. And the motto of the organization is fair chances for people, planet, and technology.
Love that planet part of that.
So the idea here is basically everyone deserves a fair chance, and that we should be treating everyone and everything with grace and mercy.
Oh,
and so,
beautiful.
So the program is usually 18 months long. So you come in and you get support through those 18 months, and you start looking about what a job will look like for you after the end of those 18 months. It could be shorter than that if you find the right opportunity. It could be the full 18 months, or at the end of the 18 months, if everything aligns right, it could be, I want to stay at Repowered, which is what happened for me, is that I got hired on as staff, and about 3 or 4 months ago, I was asked to come on as the safety officer.
Ooh, our little Julian is growing up to be such a big boy.
Yeah, so basically I get to make sure that everyone is not only physically safe in the warehouse, but we're cultivating a culture where everyone feels psychologically safe and that it's a safe place for everyone to come in and to feel seen, heard, and productive.
And I think wow, what a great opportunity, because you're dealing with, you have individuals that are working at your place that for a multitude of reasons have not felt like they're accepted, right? If they have a psychological issue, a justice involved issue, maybe a physical issue, maybe a learning disability, whatever those things are, they're sort of taken in and given the opportunity to be themselves, and then you try to meet them where they're at, what they're capable of. Is that it?
Yes, absolutely. And you also had some, so like for an example, I also am going to school full time.
Yes, you are.
So Repowered has given me that flexibility and said, we want you to stay on, we want you to work full time. But as long as you're able to meet the hours that we've set for you, we don't care what your schedule looks like. You tell us what going to school looks like for you, and that we will support that.
Wow.
Well,
Where are you going to school?
I'm going to Metropolitan State, and
Nice.
I'm majoring in individualized studies. So that's basically a fancy way of saying I get to pick my own degree. I get to pick the classes. I'm actually in a class right now where I'm planning it out and deciding which classes I want to take, what I want my focus to be. And my hope is to eventually start my own peer-led organization for those that are just as impacted.
Nice. And that just goes to the heart of who you are and what you have been. You have your own struggles and you have overcome a lot of it, but periodically you have a struggle that comes along. And who better to talk to somebody who has got some things that are sort of, showing as a barrier, showing as I don't know if I can continue to do the best work in the community that I can. I don't know if I can show up for my family. I just don't know. But somebody hits that wall and they're like, who do I call? I call Julian and his organization. And I think that's why one of the things that you came to Minnesota Recovery Connection, you see how this peer-to-peer thing works, right?
Absolutely.
You have partnered with Alicia in our office. You've partnered with Justin in our office. You certainly have used me in the office. You've talked to other people in the office on a peer-to-peer level, as well as a volunteer, as an intern, as a board member for the Peer Advisory Council. This is what helping community looks like.
Yeah, and creating basically a physical safe space where someone can go where they're struggling and say, I don't necessarily know what to do next, but I know this is a safe place for me to be.
Do it. Yeah. Yeah. And I just think about all the people that volunteer at Minnesota Recovery Connection. We just have a multitude of humans, and we've had a lot of volunteering. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Lately, last night, what did we train? We trained 12, 13 people.
Yeah, it was like 13 or 14, I want to say.
Yeah, it was just amazing. And so everybody in that room, because I came in, Julian went because he had to go do something, and I came in, and my first question was, why are you doing this? And like, we want to give back to our recovery community because our recovery community has given something to us. Mm-hmm. And I want you to know, folks, these are all people that have struggled with substance or justice or whatever their addiction is. We are stronger together than we are separated by our own mind, our own stigmas, we are stronger together. And the overarching care and consideration that a person who's been on a tough path wants to relieve that pain from somebody else in whatever way they can. I mean, that is what peer work is, isn't it, Julian?
Absolutely.
Just taking away some of that burden that we either society dumps on us or we dump on ourselves. Because I know I'm on a dark day, I'm my own worst human that I just shouldn't even look in the mirror sometimes, because I can just, I can either beat myself up or just see the inadequacies when I can go into Minnesota Recovery Connection. Everybody thinks, Caddy's fantastical or whatever she is. But, to close out this conversation, I want to say thank you to you. And I have seen this young man absolutely grow exponentially, Julian. It has been such a joy to see your growth. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And thank you for giving me the opportunity not only to be here today, but to walk in the door at Minnesota Recovery Connection and start that process of growing. I certainly wouldn't be the person that I am today without the organization's support and without your support as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. So all of you out there in Radio Land, thank you for listening to this program. We are here to help people find their way through their substance use disorder, their addictions, whatever it is. Give people love, give people hope, give people an opportunity to have their voice, because sometimes we are scared. So thank you for listening to Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution. Have a marvelous day. Thank you, AM 950.